System. Yeah, welcome to tonight's talk. There's promptly another one joining in. I'm Sonya. I will do the admin side tonight, and I'm very happy to welcome Claire Snowden-Darling tonight, who's head of the College of Functional Wellness and the founder of Balanced Wellness, who will give us an insightful talk today about stress. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you, Sonya. Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Claire Snowden-Darling. And what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is the underlying stress that contributes to chronic disease. And it can be very surprising. So let's just get started. So as Sonya said, I am the head of the College of Functional Wellness and Balanced Wellness, which is a group of clinics, which I started in 2008. And I worked alongside a gastroenterologist to create a very medically admired IBS protocol in 2012. That actually really steered my career, because one of the things that I discovered, which I'm going to be talking to you about a little bit later on, is how hugely impactful hormones are on our digestion. I think somebody needs to mute themselves. Yeah, thanks. So hormones hugely impactful on our digestion, which steered me down the road of looking at hormones, blood sugars, adrenals, digestions, immune and emotional transformation in clinic, which sounds like quite a lot, but you're going to see why they're all connected. And I'm regularly featured in national media talking about adrenals, hormones, digestion, all of the things that I've just mentioned. The College of Functional Wellness, well, accidentally through this work, my business partner Laura, that's her standing next to me, we are kinesiologists and nutritionists and emotional coaches. And when we were diving down this rabbit hole of research around blood sugars and stress and adrenals, we basically started to look at all the kinesiology protocols and created a whole new way of looking at the body through kinesiology. And we basically accidentally created a whole new arm of kinesiology. So we called that functional kinesiology, and that led to the birth of our college. So it was born out of the creation of exploring this hormonal health. And we have always been a little bit one foot in the medical world and one foot in the holistic world. So we partner with a lot of doctors. And so our work really tends to be a bridge for clients. So as I mentioned, we're accredited and we provide accredited training in kinesiology, but we also realize that not everyone wants to be a kinesiologist. In fact, some people probably don't even know what it is, and I'm not going to bore you with that now. But we realized that by actually taking a modality out of this research, we could actually reach a lot more people. So, you know, personal trainers, reflexologists, doctors, anybody who wants to really understand what is going on more deeply in the body with these hormonal connections and digestion and immune. And we called it functional wellness coaching. So we do actually do accredited practitioner training in the functional wellness coaching, which is all the stuff that I'm talking to you about today. We also teach people nutrition and emotional coaching. So we've got lots of students training at the moment, which is super exciting because I know that they are really helping with the health crisis. So let's talk about that. So we have got this global health crisis, and I don't even need to talk about the pandemic because there's enough else going on. So these are the 10 chronic common conditions for adults. And I'm going to talk to you later. Take a little note of this infographic now, because later we're going to be referring back to it. So the chronic conditions include diabetes, obesity, of course, we know that, inflammatory conditions. So that is a little bit of an umbrella term, because actually through my talk today, hopefully you'll see that nearly everything is an inflammatory condition. Hormone imbalances, and of course, cancer, which is now 1 in 2. And I don't know how we sleptwalked into normalizing that cancer is 1 in 2, but it's 1 in 2. On top of that, we have this huge issue with climate change, pollution. So the climate change is affecting our food, pollution, pesticides and food chain depletion. We have the struggling NHS. We have a lot of medication usage, including the pill and HRT. So this is the global health crisis that we are presented with day in, day out in clinic. These are the things that people are coming in with. So what is stress? Why am I talking to you about it? So a little bit about the endocrine system, and I apologize if I'm teaching anyone to suck eggs, but let's just go through it and then we're all on the same page. And for any endocrinologists out there, yes, I know this is a deeply simplified version, but I like to teach it in a way that it's really approachable. So our endocrine system is our glandular system. It's where our messages happen in the body. So basically there's two ways that the body gets messages. It gets them through our senses. So I can see a truck coming towards me, I can smell burning, or I can feel heat, excuse me, or it gets messages from inside the body. So I'm hungry, I need a wee, I need a poo, I need to sleep. These are messages that come from inside the body, and those messages are relayed by chemicals. So it's our chemical messaging system. And it predominantly, we have the hypothalamus, which is the central nervous system, pineal gland, which regulates our light, dark sensing, our sleep, our pituitary gland, which is the master of the whole orchestra and tells all the other endocrine glands what to do and produces a lot of hormones itself. We have the thyroid gland, which causes metabolism, heat and cold. We have the thymus, which is our immune system. We have the pancreas, which in the endocrine system, of course, is responsible because of insulin for blood sugar regulation, but it also has a digestive job, which is breaking down fats. So we then have our adrenal glands, and our adrenal glands are sitting on top of our kidneys, and then we have our testes and our ovaries in females. And so we have got this whole system working, and it's supposed to work in alignment. However, it goes out of alignment because of a lot of things that we're going to talk about, and common symptoms of people struggling with an endocrine system. They're tired, they're exhausted, or they're wired. So they've just got these racing thoughts that I call it getting people off the floor or scraping them off the ceiling. They've got sugar cravings, inflammation, they've got digestive problems, they've got colds and bugs, they've got sleeping difficulties, they've got headaches, they've got weight gain or weight loss, they're hot, they're cold, they've got a low sex drive, they've got irregular periods. That's just the common symptoms. There are loads. So you can see how so many people have got these common symptoms of endocrine issues, but they're just normalized. We're just normalizing them. But that is saying, I have got an issue in my endocrine system. Now, when we have a sort of constant, this issue going on in the endocrine system, and the main issue will be stress, what happens is we have this conversation that happens between the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, and our adrenals. And the hypothalamus, because it's potentially sensed danger, or our pituitary gland has got a message of danger, I'm hungry, whatever. They will send a message to the adrenals that say, make cortisol. So the adrenals will produce cortisol, and then this feedback loop, this nice red feedback loop, will go back to the two glands and say, I've done it, switch off the memo. I don't need to know that anymore. I've already done it. But that was in response to something that happened, maybe 20 minutes ago. And now we are still on the go. So that was maybe the alarm clock going off. And then we've heard the kids having an argument, and then we've had caffeine, and now we're in the car. So what happens is the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary are constantly telling the adrenal glands to make cortisol, make cortisol, make cortisol. And what happens is this feedback loop just gets switched off. So we get this one-way message, make cortisol, make cortisol, make cortisol, make cortisol, and no, switch that memo off. So the feedback loop gets damaged. This is called the HPA axis dysregulation. And we see a lot of people struggling with this cortisol they're just not functioning. So we get people, we can get people with low cortisol, we can test for that. And when we're talking low, I can talk to you later about blood tests and the difference between blood tests and other kind of functional tests. But blood tests, there needs to be a really big physiological change in the bloods for it to show up. And also the parameters are very, very set parameters. They're not taking into account biochemic individuality, what is right for one person. Whereas when we've got other functional tests, we're actually seeing how do people use their cortisol. Is it spiking at the wrong time of day? Is it actually just generally a little bit low? Not, a blood test which just says there's cortisol here. They give us much more information. So we see people with low cortisol, they're exhausted. We see people with really high cortisol who are also exhausted but wired. So this is HPA axis, and really, for me, it is the underlying reason why stress is behind so many common chronic conditions. And so when we treat them where they're manifesting, we're missing the issue. So let's just talk a little bit more in depth about that. Particularly with women, I work a lot with menopausal women, but this is not exclusively for menopausal women. Our ovaries are not the only place in the body that we make progesterone, testosterone, and estrogen. Now we're seeing vast quantities of women with hormone imbalances, PCOS, endometriosis, fertility issues, period problems. I see young girls as young as 14 with these problems. We're seeing this across the board, and it's hugely on the increase in the medical world. So endometriosis, hardly anyone had that. It's everywhere. PCOS, it's everywhere. So the ovaries are not the only place that make and regulate our hormones. They're also made in the adrenal glands. Now, this is actually why menopausal women struggle or are struggling more, because we're also stressed going into menopause. And as our ovaries switch off making those hormones, our adrenal glands should be making that background progesterone, estrogen, testosterone, and they're not, because the adrenal glands are tired. So what happens, and I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I kind of really want to give you the picture here. The adrenal glands are responsible for this drop down, this first level, 3 big processes. So first of all, in the adrenal glands, we need cholesterol, which is made from fat, to make a series of hormones. So I'm going to talk to you more about that with diet, because the low fat diet craze has been one of the major contributors to chronic stress. So cholesterol is hugely important for our health, because this is how we're going to make these hormones. Our adrenal glands make our adrenaline and our noradrenaline, and that's the neurotransmitter. These are the neurotransmitters for stress. They also make our aldosterone. And aldosterone is a very overlooked hormone, and aldosterone is to do with fluid retention and blood pressure. So this is really important when we go back to thinking about those chronic conditions, because it's very easy to talk about, the heart palpitations and beta blockers and things like that, and go for medication when actually we're not dealing with what is going on at the level of the adrenal glands. So I know doctors do tests for aldosterone, but again, we're not looking at how are we functionally using it. And we don't know what the metrics were before. Is this less? Is it too much? We're not asking enough questions of these hormones. Of fluid retention, I've had clients come in with, huge fluid retention and just put on like fluid retention tablets. It's not going to fix the problem. It's going to put a sticking plaster on it. We need to be dealing with, why are those adrenal glands so stressed? Why is this aldosterone balance going off? Why can't we explore that? And I feel that's what we do very much in the sort of functional nutrition world. So let's go back to the cholesterol, because this is where it gets really interesting. So cholesterol, there is a hormone that is made from cholesterol called pregnenolone. So pregnenolone is a precursor hormone, but it also does a lot in its own right. It's a really important hormone. Pregnenolone goes on to make DHEA, which is it's a bit of a wonder hormone for us. It's kind of keeps us very youthful and energized. But DHEA also in itself goes on to make testosterone and estrogen. Pregnenolone then will go on to make cortisol, but this is called the pregnenolone steal. I would prefer it was called the progesterone steal, but you can't change what's on the internet. It's called the pregnenolone steal because if we are undergoing stress, the body will choose to make cortisol instead of progesterone. Now, let's just think why. Obviously in women, progesterone means progestation hormone. If I am being chased by saber-toothed tigers, is it more important for me to be able to hold a baby, or is it more important for me to be able to get away from the danger? It's more important for me to be able to get away from the danger. So let's make cortisol, let's not make progesterone. So we are seeing this in young girls. We are seeing pregnenolone steal. The body is going into this cortisol overdrive and not making enough progesterone. So how can we just then try and deal with a period problem with the pill when we're not dealing with this chronic stress picture underneath? So I spend my life talking about menopause, and this is fundamentally why menopause is currently, you know, one of the big hot topics, is because women who were told to have it all are now getting into menopause and are broken because they have been in the pregnenolone steal for a really, really long time, and now their body hasn't got it as they're going through menopause. That switch I mentioned, they're just not doing that effectively, and so their bodies are falling over. So now loading people up with progesterone, loading them up with, in men's case, testosterone, or women's. I do get a lot of men where they've been recommended testosterone, but they are in this process and the testosterone literally leaves them absolutely wired, because the issue isn't with this end of the chain hormone, it's further up. It's like, I'm not eating enough cholesterol, I can't make enough pregnenolone. Often when we actually give people pregnenolone or DHEA, it can make the testosterone and estrogen, the pregnenolone can make the progesterone. There's a really different way of looking at how we can support people when we understand it's these adrenal glands that are really, really stressed. So let's just have a quick look at why this is important. So I'm sure you're all very aware of the hormones in the female cycle. So we have our estrogen. Now this stimulates its ovulation, its metabolism, its energy, its libido, its mood, it's good for our heart, and it's an insulin regulator. Progesterone calms us down, it calms us, which is why with things like PMDD, the mood dysphoria disorder that women can get around sort of ovulation, just before they're bleeding, when they haven't had enough progesterone come in, this is where they see the mood issues. So really, really bad PMT, really painful periods, they're not getting the progesterone. So cycle regulator, fertility, mood, bloating. Isn't that interesting? Because how many people experience bloating, think it's their, you know, gut issues. Sleep problems. Now, bearing in mind that sleep is one of the most medicated conditions. Hair, lovely skin, period problems, bone, very, very bone related. So a lot of osteoporosis it's overlooked, from progesterone is overlooked, and it reduces inflammation. Progesterone is a bit of a wonder drug for women. And then we've got testosterone, libido, energy, hair, bone health, breast health, fertility, menstrual and vaginal health. It does a lot for us, does testosterone. Now, this is important because when we are actually giving women HRT that is not natural or body identical, we're giving them synthetic progesterone that actually acts in the body more like testosterone. It looks, if you look at the chemical composition, it looks like testosterone. So we've got estrogen stimulating, testosterone stimulating, progesterone should be calming. But if I've got the synthetic, I'm absolutely, you know, ramped up and I'm jittery. So this is where women sit in front of me and burst into tears and say, am I going mad? I go, no, you just need some progesterone. So we really need to understand why it's important that our adrenal glands are functioning, that we're making our progesterone. And if we aren't actually making enough of our progesterone, or we're going through menopause, why we need body identical progesterone and not the fake progesterones. So the other thing I want to tell you here about when we are stressed and like in that wired place, we have two sides to our nervous system. We have our parasympathetic, which is our wind down, de-stress, get jiggy with it. And we have our sympathetic, which is our get up and go. Now, what's really interesting when you start looking at this from a bigger picture is if we are in adrenal stress, using a lot of cortisol in that pregnenolone steal, the HPA axis dysregulation, we can become sympathetic nervous system dominant. Now, when you actually look at what that means, it looks like we are get up and going. So people struggle with breathing, they get short breath, which is also one of the things that can cause anxiety. So I'm always thinking adrenals with anxiety. It's not just a case of let's medicate the anxiety. Let's look at this whole picture. The digestive system, now this is interesting. It says decrease activity. Now what that actually means is we stop making as much acid and enzymes in our stomach to digest our food. How many people have got acid reflux, indigestion, bloating, food just doesn't go down, I'm really struggling. Well, we're not going to be able to digest our food if we're sympathetic nervous system dominant. So we get all of these things where actually when we just stop looking at this as it's the digestive system. I've got this imbalance of acid and enzymes, which is coming out as sort of heartburn or indigestion. Quick take Gaviscon. Rather than the sticking plaster, let's look at the stress underneath that is contributing to people becoming sympathetic nervous system dominant, and how do we address that? So what causes stress? I actually hate the word stress. It has become such an overused word. It's like, and people are so switched off to it. You talk about stress, they go, yeah. Or my favorite, I thrive on stress. I go, no, that's just your adrenal glands. You're an adrenaline junkie, and you say you thrive on stress because you're actually so stressed your body doesn't know how to live without it. I'm not judging. I used to be that person, and then I broke my body and I had to fix it again. So what causes stress? So I prefer the word stressors. What is a stressor on the body? Because the problem is, living in 2022, that's stressful. It's already stressful. It's already way more stressful than it should be. Gosh, look out the window. It's stressful. I mean, just look at the news for 5 minutes. It's stressful. So there's stuff that we can't control, and there's stuff that we can control. So I really like to empower people to understand that stressors are things that we can control, and we can therefore reduce the stress impact on our body. So we teach something called the 4 realms, and these 4 realms are biochemical. So in this case, biochemical influences, electrical influences, emotional influences, and structural influences. So this is a kinesiology thing. We look at all these aspects of biochemically, electrically, emotionally, structurally. So that would be, an example of that would be food. We're going to come on to it. I'm going to come on to it. I'm going to go to the next one. There we go. I already got a nice slide. So biochemical stressor could be food intolerances. Now, I remember when I was creating the IBS protocol, and the gastroenterologist would say, IBS is food intolerances and stress. And I'm like, okay, can we be more specific than that? Because, allergies are not intolerances, and intolerances are very hard to diagnose medically. So there's something called a non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is you're not a celiac, but you have a gluten sensitivity. But there's no way to medically define that. So it goes undiagnosed. So food intolerances are, I often say to people, they say, do you think I've got an intolerance to, I don't know, it's on the plate. Do you think I've got an intolerance to eggs? And I say, well, tell me what happens when you eat eggs. I feel really sick. I feel really bloated. And I'm like, yeah, you've got an intolerance to eggs. In kinesiology, we can test for it, and there are other methods of testing for things. But if you're getting a reaction after you eat food, yeah, you're intolerant to it. We're not supposed to have reactions to food. So a food intolerance tends to happen 20 minutes to 4 hours after you've eaten something. And you're talking about joint pain, headaches, gut pain, loose bowels, that kind of thing. Tickly, sort of itchy mouth, that kind of stuff. An allergy it happens immediately. And as we know, they can be big reactions that get bigger and bigger and bigger. Another biochemical stressor would be poor diet. And I'm going to talk about diet in a little bit. Something that people aren't talking about very often enough, and I don't think in the medical world particularly, is chemical toxicity. So there is a lot of chemical toxicity in skincare, cleaning products, pesticides, and pollution. It's hugely stressful for the human body. There are a lot of those chemicals are called endocrine disruptor chemicals. We talked about how important the endocrine was earlier, so we need to be thinking about this. It's one of the first things I get clients cleaning up. You know, we can't really change our exposure to pollution, but we can work on the rest of our body. Depleted nutrition. So this is very stressful on the body. There is a huge lack of minerals in our soils, like magnesium, huge lack, because we are propagating our, food in those big hydroponic tunnels. They're barely in the soil. When they're in the soil, there's loads of pesticides. Well, if the pesticide is stopping the worm going and pooing near your carrots, guess where all the nutrients are? It's in the worm poo. So we really need that soil to be, replenished. Dehydration is a huge biochemical stressor on the body, and also poor quality water. So, we think we're also lucky because we can drink all this water from the tap, but our water is really polluted these days because so many people are on things like antidepressants and the pill. And so we need to have this good quality water, or a lot of people will drink squash or fizzy water. They're not drinking water. Medications, contraception, and hormone replacement can be biochemical stressors on the body, especially in the case of the hormone, the contraception and the hormone replacement. As I was saying, if it is this synthetic progesterone that causes us to be more sympathetic, nervous system dominant. Alcohol and addictions, well, we know that would be a biochemical stressor. And also, particularly in the UK, reduced sunlight and reduced exposure to vitamin D is a big biochemical stressor on the body. So I want you to start, as I'm going through the next couple of slides, starting to think about your Wi-Fi bandwidth at home, because that's how I want you to start thinking about the human body and our ability to cope with stress. I want you to think about bandwidth. And we all know that if one of your kids is downloading a movie on your bandwidth, you can't open Instagram. Like, it just can't happen. There's a bandwidth issue. This is what we're seeing, is that clients are coming in and we've got a certain amount of bandwidth. Well, if our bandwidth is already taken up with, okay, I'm really, really stressing because of I'm having to work from home with the pandemic and homeschooling and all the things, stress. I've got, financial pressures. I've got this, I've got that, I've got the other. How much bandwidth have I got left? Like this much. So then what if I'm eating something I'm intolerant to 5 times a day? What if I'm not having any water? Now, when something actually happens, I've got no bandwidth. And I'm going to, be in anxiety. I'm going to fall into depression. I'm going to end up with IBS. I have no bandwidth. So let's go back to our stressors. So we have the electrical. So dehydration is an electrical stressor as well, because our body runs by electricity, and the dehydration actually stops that process. So our brain needs a lot of water to be able to process, and dehydration is huge. So we talk about 2 liters of water a day, and that's not black tea or black coffee, and not juice. Like, the body needs water because of all of the stress that we're under. So EMF radiation and devices exposure, we know that is a big issue, particularly on our poor pineal glands. If we're doing it late at night, really messes up our light and dark systems. And light toxicity, this is huge. There is some incredible work out now about how, when it's dark outside as it is now, we should not be sitting here with all these lights on. It is fundamentally going against how humans evolved. And so these are electrical stressors on the body, taking up our bandwidth. Then, of course, I don't think the emotional ones need much explanation. We have got an overwhelming amount of anxiety and depression in the world now. Then you start adding in just general life overwhelm, issues in relationships, or being a parent, parenting, social pressure, and inequality, I mean, that's huge, you know, and for some people that is all encompassing. Social media pressure. I would not want to be a 17-year-old girl today. Horrendous. It's bad enough. It's just so much pressure. Low self-esteem, that's the real pandemic. Financial and work pressure, societal pressures, including obviously the current pandemic, and addictions. All of those are taking up the huge amount of bandwidth that we then therefore can't process our gluten, for example. And then we have our structural stressors. So this will be poor posture, lack of exercise and movement, sedentary lifestyles, or conversely, over-exercise and the wrong type of exercise, or the exercising at the wrong time of day. This is a really, really big deal, especially for your adrenal glands. I see a lot of people worried about weight gain, but, you know, absolutely crucifying themselves at HIIT or CrossFit late at night and wondering why they're not sleeping and they're putting on weight. You know, we really need to be aware of this. So there's a lot here that we can influence. And so this is why I want to bring your attention to it, because when we can remove some of these stressors, now we're actually giving our body the opportunity to, you know, thrive and rebalance again and get back to health. So I call this the whole health approach. It's not going in with a one thing fix all mentality, because there is no one silver bullet. Actually, whole health is looking at, okay, when are you exercising? What are you eating? How much light do you actually allow yourself a bit of darkness before you go to sleep? These questions need to be asked. I'm just sort of perennially perplexed that when I go to my vets, you know, if there's an issue with my dog, they ask, is drinking water, how its bowels, what foods they're eating, going for a walk. We don't ask that of humans. Why aren't we asking that of humans? So this is the whole health approach. So I'm going to introduce you to the triangle of hormonal health, which is the clinical model that I created. This was all on the back of my own health journey, where I just wasn't getting results, and I wasn't from the medical or the holistic world. And I needed to look at why. Now, actually, the reason why my medical issues weren't really being dealt with effectively is because people were looking at the symptoms. Even in the holistic world, they were looking at the symptoms. So when I had digestive issues, we were looking at digestion. And what we discovered in the triangle, with the triangle of hormonal health, is if you look at the edges of the triangle, there are these 3 hormone sets that have a huge interplay with each other. There's the blood sugar hormones, there's the stress hormones, and there's the sex hormones. I want you to think of this like a stool. When this stool is in balance, you've got a lovely, you know, you can sit on that, that's lovely. But if one of my legs is wonky, now it's all over the place. And if 2 are wonky, you know, now I'm going to end up unwell. And what we discovered was that more that we researched was that the immune system and the digestive system are just victims of this triangle being out of balance. So this, for me, is why stress is so fundamentally important, because the more we are in this cortisol production, the more we are going to be causing inflammation in the body. So let's start with blood sugars. Blood sugars was an aha moment for me. So I'd gone through all my nutrition training and, you know, talked about diet and all the things. And yes, I understood how blood sugars worked. I didn't have the aha moment for many, many years. So I'm going to talk you through it, and then I'm going to tell you my aha moment. So the green wobbly line in the middle is how a well-balanced diet our blood sugar should be. But for most people, most of the time, what happens is this red line. Now, this red line, what we need to remember is that we can end up with unbalanced blood sugars and even diabetes through stress alone. Because if you look at the very bottom of that trough, it's cortisol that happens there. So cortisol happens when our blood sugars drop too low. So if our blood sugars spike, drop, because of cortisol, because as soon as cortisol's in our system, it will spike our blood sugars, because that's its job, to put sugar into our system. It's already spiked our blood sugars. And in response to that, we have to produce insulin, which is going to make them plummet again. So some people are in this blood sugar roller coaster all day. Just doing a fasting blood sugar test will not show you what is actually going on with your blood sugars all through the day, because your pancreas's job is to pump out enough insulin to keep your blood sugars stable. What I'm interested in is how hard is your pancreas having to work to keep them stable, because we do not want it working that hard. We need to make it easy on it, because there's a lot of other stuff going on in our body. So that's the bit that I think is fundamentally missing from the medical approach is, oh, well, your blood sugar's fine. No, the only way we can actually test to see what's going on with someone's blood sugars is with a continuous the continuous glucose monitor. The continuous glucose monitors, which were made popular by the people with type 1 diabetes, where they're like a little monitor and the little thing that sticks in your arm, and absolutely brilliant. So people who are non-diabetic using them as well, we can actually start to see what is going on with people's blood sugars. What is actually going on? How hard is that pancreas having to work? So that is a blood sugar roller coaster. Now that can come because of stress or sugar, because we've eaten the wrong thing. And by sugar, that means all carbohydrates. Like carbohydrates turn into sugar. I don't care if they're slow release carbohydrates or fast release carbohydrates. At some point, they are turning into sugar. So I'm not anti-carbohydrates, by the way. It's just, we need to just name it how it is, and then we can look at what we do about it. So we need to make sure that these blood sugars are regulated, because if they're not, already I've got a wonky leg on my blood sugars, but now it's causing a wonky leg on my stress hormones, because this is a stressor that I could do without. And then we find out over time that there is a big connection with our sex hormones. So as I said, it's carbohydrates that are causing the problem. So other blood sugar hormones that people don't really talk about. So we know about insulin and how it lowers blood sugar, but the connection that people don't make as well is its fat storage. So as soon as we produce insulin in the body, it means store fat. That's the signal. So people who are struggling with weight loss, it's because they're often in this insulin sort of place. Now, the aha moment that I had a few years ago was this realization that every time we put food in our mouth, I'm going to have a hormone response. And that hormone response is either going to take me to wellness, or it's going to take me to a blood sugar roller coaster. So even if I'm just like grabbing a banana on the go, banana healthy, must be healthy. That's just a carbohydrate on its own, spiking my blood sugar. No, we need to think differently about diet. So other hormones, leptin, people don't talk about leptin. This reduces appetite and it's fat burning. Sounds good, huh? The problem is when leptin is not balanced, we are hungry all the time. We can't get full. Same with ghrelin. Ghrelin is the hormone that actually makes your tummy rumble. And again, leptin and ghrelin work very, very closely together. I like to call them leprechaun and gremlins. When they're out of balance, we really have to get them back into balance. So a lot of people can, the insulin is only part of the picture. We have to work hard to get these under control. Now, the other interesting one is cholecystokinin, or CCK. This is our satisfaction hormone, but CCK also has a huge connection with one of the digestive hormones in the gut. So when CCK is out of balance, because our blood sugars are out of balance, we're going to have a gut issue. So this was the big connection with irritable bowel syndrome, which I'm going to come on to in a bit. So let's move on to our gut microbiome. Well, it's become really trendy, right? Like everyone's talking about it. So 40,000 parasites, 5 million fungi, 300,000 bacteria in the body. We're barely human. We are mostly these amazing critters. It's very sensitive to refined carbohydrates, pesticides, medication, and foods that we're intolerant to. It will really damage your gut microbiome. And when it's disrupted, the bacteria produce endotoxins, which themselves cause inflammation. And that inflammation is going to go into your bloodstream and go anywhere it wants to, in your neural chain, in your joints. So any issues that people are having, this is why autoimmune disease, autoimmune disease is The central issue is this inflammation, all of this imbalance, but as soon as it gets into the bloodstream, it's going to find the Achilles heel to sit in and cause the issue. It detoxes estrogen. This is called our estrobiome. So when people are struggling with estrogen, this is what's going on. There's an issue in the gut microbiome. And the bowel hormone storm, which is also a clinical model that we have created. So we're going to start at basically, let's start at 12 o'clock, erratic eating. So very common, people eating erratically. Oh, I've missed breakfast, I've done this, which will cause a blood sugar instability. That, the instability is going to, either because of cortisol spiking or because I've eaten something I shouldn't really eat, I'm going to get high insulin. That also, high insulin stops, it reduces motilin in the small intestine, and motilin is the hormone that makes the movement happen, the motility happen in your small intestine, which in turn reduces the peristaltic motion. So food can't go through. See that griping feeling in IBS? It's that. Then, because of the blood sugar instability, I've got more adrenaline and cortisol going into my system, which, if you remember, switches on that sympathetic nervous system dominance, which is going to reduce my acid and enzyme production. And then I'm not digesting at all. Once I've got all this going on, I'm now in a stress response because that sympathetic nervous system, we know pregnenolone steal, going to lower my progesterone, testosterone, estrogen. Sorry, lower my progesterone and testosterone. But actually what happens is because I've got low progesterone, I end up with high estrogen. This all just starts sitting in the gut. And this boosts serotonin and more pain. When we've got a lot of serotonin, it causes pain. All of this excess estrogen is one of the major contributors. That's why to elevated histamine and inflammation. Major symptom of perimenopause. Women have elevated histamine as they have estrogen dominance. The elevated histamine and inflammation is literally triggering all our mast cells in our immune system, which causes more food intolerance. When I had IBS at my peak, which is why I was interested in doing IBS originally, I was intolerant to over 30 foods. I'm now intolerant to 4. It's unreal. So food intolerances go up and up and up. I literally got to the point where I was that person who was becoming intolerant to the world. Like I couldn't wear cosmetics. It was just, the people that have to literally wear like the hazmat suits, that I was genuinely getting that way. So not even just food intolerances, but like life intolerance. So when we've got all these extra hormones sitting in the bowel, the high estrogen, more excess cortisol, this, all of this stuff going on, elevated histamine, our liver's trying to detox it all, becomes overwhelmed. And so we get this buildup of the estrogen, cortisol, serotonin in the bowel. I'm not digesting my fats. I'm not, pooing properly. I've got all these bowel issues. I've got this griping, this pain. And so guess what? Because I've got IBS, I've got erratic eating again, and around and around and around we go. So the best thing that we can do is we need to deal with those blood sugars and reduce that cortisol straight away. That's where we need to go. So a lot of the medication for IBS doesn't work, or only works for about 20% of people. And it's not fixing the problem, it's a sticking plaster. And it's because stress is underlying all of it. And the stress often is poor diet. And what happens is our immune system becomes a victim, because our gut microbiome is 70%, actually wherever you read it says something different, but basically it's a high percentage of our gut microbiome is actually our immune system. So if I've got all this going on in my gut, how much do you think my immune system can actually function on being an immune system? It can't. So in a dysfunctional immune response is due to food intolerances, the toxins we were talking about, xenoestrogens, which is the toxins that disrupt your endocrine from the toxic chemicals. It also is put under pressure by chronic infections, which we know from things like long COVID, high stress. And rather than suppressing the immune system, which is what is very common in the approach for autoimmune, we ask, not that we can work with immune suppressants anyway, but we would prefer to ask the question, why is the immune system responding in this way? Because we also know that it's common that once someone has taken medication to suppress an autoimmune disease over here, bam, another one pops up. Like, it's common for people to have 7 or 8 autoimmune diseases because the key issue is not being addressed. So what are the recommendations? How do we get around this? Well, we've got to reduce the stressors. If we can't reduce stress, reduce the stressors. Get rid of the food intolerances and clean up your diet. We've got to work on those sedentary lifestyles. We just have to. It's really hard when people talk about time, but we don't have time to be ill either. Cleaning out those toxic chemicals and working on the lifestyle pressure and the emotional issues. And that's easier said than done, but we are also all addicted to stress. So how can we learn to reframe it, to review, to view it differently? So let's look at the blood sugar. We need to learn how to eat balance. This is something that I talk about all the time. We talk about the PFC every 3. At every meal, so 3 times a day, where's my protein, where's my carbs, where's my fat? Now, the problem is, I'm going to talk about a vegan diet for a moment. I don't have an issue with the vegan diet. I have an issue with people doing any diet in an unbalanced way. But taking the vegan diet for a moment, or vegetarians really love to say, my protein is nuts and cheese. Well, that's great. There is protein in nuts and cheese, but every time we eat, we're going to get a hormonal response. I'm not particularly interested in your daily amount of protein. I'm interested in what's happening in the moment that you put that food in your mouth. So whilst there's protein in nuts and cheese, it's predominantly a fat. So your body is instantly reading it as a fat. It has to digest it to get the protein out. We need it to see protein. It needs to read protein to get a different hormone response. We need to get the glycogens. We need to get like all of those blood sugars balanced. If we eat something, there's not enough protein in it, the body will produce insulin in response to the sugars that are about to hit the bloodstream. This is a real huge wow that a lot of my clients have, particularly people who are vegan, when they say, well, I'm eating chickpeas. Now, chickpeas are predominantly a carbohydrate. Yes, they've got protein in them, but where's your protein source? Where is your protein source? So for clarity, proteins would be meat, fish, eggs. It's for vegans, it would be tofu and protein powders. Now, a lot of people aren't a fan of protein powders, and I'm like, no, but also not a fan of being unwell. So we've got to get those in somehow. So the protein powders for vegans would be, the rice, pea, hemp kind of protein powders. I'll tell people to pimp out everything, pimp out your porridge. Fats would be our avocados, our butters, our cheeses, our nuts, our seeds, all of those things. I'm a big fan of the old-fashioned fats, the bone stock jellies, the tallows, the lards, the suets. I have suet every morning. It's delicious. And then our carbs. So we have in abundance our greens, eat them in abundance, but choose one starchy carbohydrate. So our starches would be our fruit, root veg, grains, beans, legumes, and all the fun in the world. So sweeteners, alcohol, those kind of things. By sweeteners, I mean honey and sugar. So, cake would be starchy carb. So the trick is, I'm not going to have a risotto with sweet potato and butternut squash in it and maybe just a bit of butter. I've got like 4 portions of carbohydrates there. I've got blood sugar spiking central. I'm going to need some protein and maybe some extra fats. I need a protein at every meal. That's how we balance our blood sugars. So foods to avoid: wheat. I'm not anti or gluten, but I am anti-wheat. And there's a lot that we teach around wheat because we ruined it. We hybrid that grain, we increased the gluten content, and then we started spraying it with a pesticide that destroys the gut microbiome. Wheat, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely the devil. Processed foods, processed sugars, and non-organic dairy, that does really cause a lot of people a lot of stress. Not everyone. I would say start with the wheat and just ditch it for a month and see your blood sugars, everything change. Inflammation can change everything. The problem is, because we don't have the metric, if it's not celiacs, it's being missed. And I can honestly tell you, from having worked with thousands and thousands of clients, people notice a difference when it's not in their diet. Reviewing the contraception and the hormone replacement, there are more natural options. Doctors also don't always know about them. I'm often sending letters to GPs through, with clients, supporting them because their GP doesn't know that there's a body identical progesterone. So find out, really learn. I get very excited now when I hear that, you know, GPs being sent on training for menopause women or the HRT, because we need to know about this body identical progesterone. And correct exercise at the best time of day. People are in sympathetic nervous system dominance. We do not want them to go running or do a HIIT class. We want them doing Tai Chi, yoga, meditation, stretching, swimming, and, you know, preferably in the morning, because that's when our cortisol peaks. We have to discover what is the correct exercise at the best time of day. Learn tools to cope with emotional stress. This is something that I'm really big on educating about, because we kind of feel like we're these little corks bobbing along on the sea and all this stuff happens to us, but actually we can learn tools to cope with them. So you know, it doesn't matter how you do that, mindfulness, meditation. We teach a huge amount of inner child parenting work and how to deal with anxiety. There's so many tools out there. I really encourage people to be educated, to go and find that. And a lot of stuff is free. So we can learn how to master our emotions more and be less stressed by them. Stress is going to happen. It's how we respond to it. That's the important thing. And, you know, I'm a nutritionist, can't get away without saying supplementation. Our soils are depleted. We don't have enough vitamins and minerals in it. Most people aren't eating the right amount of omega fats, and I mean omega-3, not omega-6. Digestive aid. If their parasympathetic nervous system's not switching on, they're going to need digestive aid for a bit. Probably not Gaviscon. Herbs, like adaptogenic herbs, can actually sort of fix some of that cortisol imbalance. They're really well known about now. Ashwagandha, Siberian ginseng, things like that. And gut repair. Gut repair is huge. We've got to heal that gut microbiome. So that is everything I've got for you about stress. And so if you want any more information about this, we have a Nutrition for Health certificate, which is for anybody. This is it's an online course, 50 hours, and it is completely accredited by the FHT, the CNHC, and the Kinesiology Federation. So it fits in with pretty much anybody's existing therapy. So, you know, you could be a PT or anything at all. Doctor, if you just want to actually learn a little bit more about what is this thing with wheat, how do I recommend this, how do I know about the recommendations of this diet, how do I tweak a vegan diet to make it PFC, how do I tweak a paleo diet to make it PFC, we go through, it's lectures and talks, and we go through, it's all online, or so many different diets and the issues and ultimately how to fix them. And there are other lectures and talks. We have like a menopause talk and other hormone talks. And please do get involved with us. So Facebook, there's the list of all the pages, and Instagram, and a list of all the pages. And you can also email us at the info@functionalkinesiology.co.uk. And I believe that is me. Thank you for your time. And I believe we're going to open up some questions.
All right, thank you very much, Claire, for that very interesting talk. So yeah, I would invite all the listeners, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand. And when you click on Zoom reactions, and then you can click on raise hand, or you can obviously just pop questions in the chat. And then if you don't mind, Claire, maybe just to break the ice, I would ask the first question. When you talked about the diet, you said about eating every 3 hours. And I was just wondering about intermittent fasting, which is obviously quite a trend. And I personally follow that diet as well. So I was wondering what your take on intermittent fasting, but also multi-day fasts are, and how they would relate, for example, to the stress response or to health more generally.
So sorry if I misled you, not eating every 3 hours, but the 3 PFC every 3, so 3 times a day. So
okay, all right.
However, saying that, people who have got really, really huge blood sugar instability, I do recommend for a short period of time eating on a more regular basis. intermittent fasting can be great, but we have to balance our blood sugars first, because otherwise our adrenals are going to believe that scarcity is happening and they're going to put us into a cortisol response. So I love intermittent fasting, and there are times that I can do it because I'm chill and it's great, and there are times where I can't do it because I know that I am too stressed. So I think that there needs to be a lot broken down around intermittent fasting. And I also don't believe that for women it's a good idea to do it for a very prolonged period of times. I think it's actually good to do it in fits and starts.
All right, yeah, thank you very much. Oh, and also one option to ask a question I forgot to mention. Obviously, you can also just unmute yourself and ask Claire the question directly. All right, any questions?
Hi, Claire. It's Larice here.
Hi.
My nickname is Elle. Hi there. So I identify from your presentation that I'm suffering with a lot of these issues, and I'm aware that I should be balancing my diet, insulin regulation, etc. But I do have a lot of food intolerances, so I really do struggle getting in the fats because I can't eat avocado, I can't eat lots of seeds, and stuff like that. So do you have like modified diets that you can help with?
Yeah,
so for people that have
absolutely.
intolerances to like raw and fruits and
Yeah,
stuff like that. Okay.
100%. I hear you. I was that person. Yes, actually, we do have a modified version. So depending on where people kind of pop in, where they start, depends on what diet we work with. Ultimately, all of the diets are PFC, but we tend to go firstly down the autoimmune path, and then we end up getting more and more into the meat-based, because that's actually, the more that people have got intolerances, the more that we need to heal the gut microbiome and the immune system, and the evidence is currently with the meat-based diet. So yeah, it's the old-fashioned stuff. Suet, hello, suet, tallow. I'd be going with suet and tallow, so dripping, suet, bone stock, those things, because we tend to not be. In fact, I saw a client of mine today who in October last year, her words that I'd actually written down on her form was suicidal ideation, because she was in so much pain every time she ate. She said, I am just in tears, I am in so much pain. And I'd been working with her for quite a long time. I was like, look, it's time to go meat-based. And she has done it like so strictly for 3 months. And she said it took 3 months, but 3 weeks ago something shifted, and I am not in pain, and I am digesting, and I'm hungry again. And so there is so much evidence. I really do recommend going and checking out some of the work by Dr. Paul Saladino around the meat-based diet. And you don't have to throw yourself into it, but I have to say, for me, I did. And it's still PFC, because the meat-based, there is fruits and roots and non-toxic veg, but there's something really damaging the gut microbiome, I would say, really irritating it.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I'm sorry, can you put the last slide back on where you had the information about your 50-hour course?
Yeah, so if you just go to the College of Functional Wellness, or it's just functional-wellness.co.uk, that would have been helpful to put on there, wouldn't it? You can see that there are the courses listed, and it's the Nutrition for Health certificate.
Okay.
Yeah. So functional-wellness. Let's see if I can find it. Oh, that's brilliant. I did not put that on my slides. Functional-wellness.
Okay. Thank you. It's been really helpful. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Yeah, any further questions from Claire? If not, I would have another aspect that you mentioned as one of the stressors, and it's one that I've been looking a bit more into, but that seems to be quite complex to me, is the electrical stressors. So you mentioned EMF, and obviously 5G is a huge topic, especially in the UK at the moment, with towers coming up right, left, and center. And also an interesting idea with the light toxification, or that we are not in our natural sleep or wake patterns. And I think melatonin plays a role there.
Yeah.
So that would be something maybe, what could we do? Or do you have any tips maybe in that regard?
Yeah, again, Dr. Saladino is great. He does a lot of, he's really promoting getting back to this primal way of living. So getting back to a species appropriate way of living. And there was a great podcast that he did with a light expert. But they talk about, so we've always talked about for a long time, is using light filter glasses. So as soon as it gets dark, light filter glasses, and also not having this kind of light. I'm going to be going into a room that's basically just lit with very, very, very amber kind of colored bulbs after this. So I don't expose myself to this kind of light unless I'm doing a talk. After nightfall, I only expose myself to amber colored light to help with the pineal gland.
Great. So you could basically, because I was thinking about if you make, let's say, a fire, right? Or a wood burner, because that would be kind of a natural light source. So that would be very different from this very steady and bright artificial lights.
Exactly.
That's great.
Exactly. And light filter glasses if you do need to be doing something like this.
Yeah, I have blue filter glasses and also blue filters on all my electric devices.
Yeah.
So that helps greatly with sleeping and just with your eyes in general, because that can obviously
definitely
have adverse effects as well. All right. Yeah. Are there any further questions for Claire? All right. Yeah. Thank you, Tracy. Tracy says she really enjoyed the presentation. And yeah, we're already a bit more than an hour in. All right. So it seems there are no further questions. So, well, Claire, thank you very much for this very informative talk. We also recorded it for those who can't join today. So there will be more people who have the chance to see it, and you will probably get flooded with emails.
I'm very happy to. Anything I can do to help.
All right, then. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining, and thanks again for Claire.
You are very welcome. Thank you so much, everyone.
Yeah, have a good evening, everybody. Bye.